So now we're into the story of like, where do these ideas come from? You know, who is thinking up the new ideas that make it in the marketplace? And so one of the things that the loves we share is the antiques and the history of the game and the handmade handmade golf clubs from years past. So Bobby, talk a little bit about what where your inspiration has come from.
Well, that's easy. I actually got the bug when I was probably 14 or 13 years old. I fortunately had guys that I knew that knew the old stuff. They also knew old stuff. Back then was the 8802s, the Arnold Palmers, the George Lowe's. That was old stuff back then. We called them classic clubs now. And when I'm 14 years old, and I had a guy up the street from my house that worked on the PGA Tour. He was, I think, 10 years older than I was. But he worked on the PGA Tour. He was a shaft expert, and literally he could face remember you had to face the driver? You had to take a file, and I mean, this is like the old days, You had to be good with your hands. Well, he was so good, and he lived in a shack. But he had about $300,000 worth of golf clubs and $10,000 worth of records, and this guy was unusual. Well, he worked on the tour in a tour van, and during the JCPenney Classic, here comes Norman in his Ferrari. Here comes Freddie Couples to this guy's shack. And I'm over there fiddling with my golf clubs, and he's going to grind a sand wedge for me or whatever. And I see these tour players come out. Well, that's when I was hooked. I said, now this is really cool. So I went through a whole learning curve over the next few years of what classic clubs were and why the tour players used them. And why aren't they made anymore today? Or what a classic was. A discontinued classic club is like a 63 Corvette or a 56 Chevy. Okay, why would somebody pay now $250,000 for a 56 Chevy with 80 miles on it? Well, there's a reason for that. They're well made. It's a part of the heritage of our country, the automobile industry. So golf clubs are the same thing. I've been a member of the Golf Collectors Society, which now is called the Golf Heritage Society, for over 40 years. So I was about 18 years old, and I joined the GCS. What got me hooked on that now was we dressed in knickers and we played with hickory shafted clubs. So one of these golf clubs up here, this is my play set actually, and this is really interesting because we're allowed to play with old hickories that have even deep grooves, which are illegal, today. But the Golf Collectors Society says anything prior to 1930 that you find, you can play. And so now I put on extra length on the end of the shaft to fit me, and I put on nice suede grips, and I won the national championship when I was 30 years old, and 31, I repeated that. I shot 72 with 4 and 5 birdies with 1920 hickory clubs on a real full golf course. That was I couldn't describe how much fun that was. And guys like Gary Wyron, who are master teaching professionals, also do this same thing because it's the heritage of the game going all the way back. Our books go all the way back to the 1600s on what you can learn, who made what kind of golf clubs, where they're from, a lot of the things that people don't know today. So I have been a student of that for a long time, and I have had a lot of golf clubs over my time. I've studied them for many reasons of rarity, heritage, unusual designs, and I've traveled around the globe actually. I've been to museums in England, I've been to museums in Scotland, I've been to museums all over the United States. I've been to private collections that most people haven't seen. And I've seen a lot, what I thought was a lot of golf clubs, and you always find more that you haven't seen, which is really fun. So this is a perfect example. I saw one of these putters about 35 years ago at one of our collectors trade shows, and we're all horse trading stuff around, and there's just about everything you could possibly want to see. So I saw this. It was a radial-faced, curve-faced putter. This is, 1905, 1910, Hendry and Bishop, which is one of the most prominent club makers in Scotland. Well, this didn't really resonate with me back then. It didn't mean that much. I thought, well, this is not neat, curved face. And years later, when I I've owned the company, by the way, my putter company. This is the third time, and that's a long story. I think that's a 2-beer story, so we'll have to do that another time. But it's interesting because first time I saw this, didn't mean anything to me. Later on, I had to go from a flat face to a radial face to compete with the guys out there that were rolling the ball earlier in like the Rife Putter Company and the Yes Putter Company. So we developed a face that we took this idea, which is 108 years old, and perfected the geometry and did a couple other tweaks on it to where it works unbelievable. These guys were on the right track of rolling the ball real well. Matter of fact, I've read advertisements of these guys with this type of design as the best rolling putters in the world back then. They may have been. But I saw this putter in Bob Hanson's shop, who's got a wonderful place in Pinehurst. If you're ever in Pinehurst, North Carolina, go to Bob Hanson's place. He's got a museum that is for sale. I call it that because everything he's got is super rare, and some of it's priced right. Like this was $425 to me. Don't tell Bob, but I would have paid $1,000. So anyways, this now means so much to me because I look back at my books and I start reading again about them, and I'm going, this has been in front of me the whole time. And I was making flat face putters at 5 degrees loft, like the fat lady that I had. This thing here has 5 degrees loft. And Nick Price ended up becoming #1 player in the world with it. And now we have something that we've invented that, yes, based on old, but tweaked and improved. You know, it's like BASF, I think it's called, right? We don't make products, we just make products better. That's what I do. It's really fun. So my heritage, the heritage I study all the time, and the knowledge of the history of the game is so helpful. And I would encourage anybody that's listening to join the Golf Collectors Society because that can only give you a better insight of where our game came from and a better appreciation of where it may be going to. And things that are deemed non-conforming and illegal, I understand that. They're trying to protect our game. But fortunately, the certain things that we do are sometimes out of the box, and they're approved. And I know that's a wonderful time to live in. Hopefully they won't change anything we're doing. Now this here is the Blue Goose putter that I was mentioning earlier about that Skip Alexander and many other tour players in the 40s dominated the tour with this putter. This, if you notice the shape, you've seen putters later on that were called stamped Ted Smith, Frank Johnson model from Golfcraft, Odie Chrisman. You know, all those putters came from this putter. This was a father and son, 2 sons actually, a father and 2 sons from Houston, Texas. Tracy Parks, and all he stamped on the bottom was T.S. Parks from Houston, Texas. And the big old stamp on the side says Blue Goose. This was the original Blue Goose, and this was probably, well, look at the shaft, didn't even have chrome on it. Right during the war when they didn't have enough chrome. They had to put sheathing over raw steel, and that's probably 1945. So this is 356 sandcast aluminum that I made my fat lady out of. And I have about 8 of these in my collection, and 3 of them are the same shape as this. The rest of them are different shapes, so that's pretty interesting. But these are very little loft too. You take a look at this, you don't see much face on there. Very straight. And for back then, it was made for the tour when they sanded the greens or oiled the greens, you know, for the major championships, and it were very, very slick. So interesting, old, brought to new, and improved, and people wonder where it came from.
Wow.